Thank you, Hannah. So today, Dominic and I are going to speak about an experience that we had over a few years now, working with the design of open educational policies. And it's a participatory process. And we have some, I think, interesting examples that we'd like to share. And mostly in the short time we have, talk about how the whole process works. My name is Amiel. I'm based out of Brazil, where I have the UNESCO Chair in Distance Education. I'm currently in Slovenia at the Josef Stefan Institute, and in Slovenia, Dominic and I collaborate on these courses at the University of Nova Gorica, which we'll introduce very, very briefly. So I'll start. I'm going to pass on the ball to Dominic, and we'll kind of go back and forth. You're welcome to put any questions on the chat if you want to interrupt us with anything. We'd be glad to have a conversation as we're going through. And then we'll stay a little bit in the end for at least 5 minutes for us to talk. We also are very interested in knowing your experiences in designing open education policies or any sort of designs that you guys have. So links are also very welcome and any other materials. So we want it to be a sharing experience if we can. So I'll start by giving you a little bit of our context. This the work that we're doing is part of I think quite a unique program. It's a master's program on open education, but it's really focused on the development of leadership in the field of open education. It's based out of the University of Nova Gorica. It's in the western part of Slovenia, and it has a good connection to the UNESCO chair at the Josef Stefan Institute as well. It's quite a global program, and I'll show you some information about that. The students come from very different places. It connects not only students from very different places, but mentors from different places. So I'm based out of Brazil. There are folks from Lebanon. There are folks from the US and many countries in Europe and Africa. And so we have a lot of really great, quite multicultural and multi-contextual exchanges between the group and a really wide range of experiences. There's no specific focus on the technical development or pedagogical development, and I think some other programs that focus on, say, networked learning or e-learning, sometimes they focus on the pedagogical side or developing infrastructures or software development or considerations for the deployment of infrastructures. This is a more holistic approach. It goes everywhere from basic and advanced discussions of tools to management to applications in business to applications in higher education. It kind of encompasses a wide view of what it means to be a leader in the field of open education. And the profile of the people that join the program are generally people that are practitioners in one sense or another. So from higher education professors to people in ministries of education, to basic education teachers, coordinators of technical centers, people that can have an immediate or short-term impact on the things that they're doing on the ground, wherever they might be in the world. And that's kind of rewarding for us, and I think for them, because we can get to do work with people that can design policy, strategies, projects that have an immediate possible impact, right? So just to give you an idea of the profile, we have currently, it's a new program. It's on its second year. We have third year, sorry. We have 27 students that are enrolled, a slightly bigger proportion of female students for the program, and quite a wide variety of countries represented particularly from the global south, but also from the region, Slovenia, Serbia, and students from the United States, but a really great presence from students from different countries and very different realities in Africa, which makes it really quite exciting for us, I think for everybody to get all of these very, very, very different perspectives from very different sectors of education as well. Very interesting exchanges. So this is the context we're in, and we're trying to help folks from multi-sectors, multi-countries, different languages, different contexts to think about how do they design a strategy, how do they think about designing a strategy for open education. So we go from the principle that we all agree that open education is a valued thing, but then how do you think about planning for this and strategizing? And this is the context of what we're doing. And I'll pass on to Dominic now.
Okay, so I hope you can hear me now. Yeah, so as Tel said, Tel and I are both working on this program together. It's been very nice to do this in a very kind of tandem format, a very collaborative format. And maybe just before we continue to talk about our program, just very quickly, what's all this got to do with university futures? because we're at the University Future Festival. So we really think that what we're doing here is we're trying to really trying to implement an open university, and in the sense of an open university as what Barnett has called the ecological university, which is really looking at universities as communities of human flourishing and development, and supporting development in society as a whole. So this is very much focused on trying to build, basically focused on how can we build up communities and new generations of change makers through our program. So we see this very much in the context of this piece here. If you go to the next slide, I think you're in control, I can tell. And so what we're trying to do, I've already kind of alluded to it. So we're trying to do two things. In the short to medium term, we're trying to build up and support a new generation of policymakers, people who support strategy and policy on all levels, and therefore help to change the framework conditions and conditions. So therefore, that's medium to long term, our graduates, and that will then create better teaching and learning, and that's really what we're trying to do as this program. So it reflects in the way we're working this ethos as well. So then, if we just talk very briefly about the two major strands of our methods, the one point is for us to view policymaking in such a way. Okay, and I'll turn off my camera. Let me just see how I can do that.
I think we lost. Oh, there we go. There we go. Now the audio is back.
Okay, so I've turned off the camera. Maybe that helps. If the connection is really bad, then I'll just pass straight back to Tel. What I was just briefly just saying is we're trying to build a master program which really reflects also the general ideas about open education, and also how we can, in the short term, build up this new generation of policymakers and educational strategists, and with the hope that this generation will also be able to create more enabling environments that we have really better teaching and learning across all the educational opportunities in the world. So let's talk very briefly then about the methods. So if we could go to the second two slides, Tel. So the one thing is that if we look at a policy, typically we always are talking about an OER policy as about formal regulations regarding support, funding, adoption, and the use of educational content. But formal regulations is only one part of this. So formal regulations are kind of the way of thinking, okay, so we need to set some regulations somehow. But the main point is how can we actually really achieve this support, funding, and adoption? And so this leads us to a very kind of open, collaborative idea of policymaking. So just before we go to that, we go on to the next slide and we just look at also the definition of OER, just to remember what we have in the UNESCO recommendations. And here it was very clearly stated in the UNESCO recommendations, we need these supportive policy. We need governments, we need educational institutions and authorities to be setting the frameworks to make it possible for us to achieve, for example, open education in the mainstream. We need to get away from it being something of a kind of a grassroots development, and policy is the key element to that, and strategy. So how do we do that? So if we go to the next slide, then we see our general approach, which says, okay, good policy needs to be clear, but it needs to think through a set of stages, starting with an ambitious long-run goal, but working iteratively towards this in very realistic phases. So often when we talk about policy, it can become very ambitious, but then it's very hard to implement. And opposite can also happen. You can have a very simplistic policy, but it's never really going to get to the goals you need. The other point is, if we want to make sure that a policy is good, we need to make sure that policy is inclusive and is based on collaboration, because neither a top-down policy, in other words, a policy decided by a small group of policymakers or their advisors is good, or a bottom-up policy which is really based on too much kind of on the variety of implementation in context. Neither of those are good, so that's why we need collaboration and deliberation. And thirdly, we need the right people, and we need people to work themselves as policy entrepreneurs. And those are the things we're trying to support through our program. And just finally then, on the last slide I'm going to present, we just see the general framework that we're using from the UNESCO guidelines that were drawn up through a number of colleagues of ours, where we really thought about, okay, so if we're going to have a good comprehensive policy, which is collaborative, but which is very clear about what goals we need, and is really thinking iteratively and is thinking of every phase as a learning phase, then we need to think through these 7 steps. And this is what we use when we're talking to our learners, our students on the master program, to say, yes, we want to work collaboratively. Yes, we need open processes, but let's start with a very clear framework of the things that need to be thought through, so that when we think of a theory of change, it's very clear what we mean by that. And then through looking at that, they then go on to a much more kind of inclusive, collaborative type of format. And I'll pass on to Tel to explain that. Thank you.
All right. So part of what we do is in order to get them to understand not only the principles of more participatory design and to value this experience of participatory design, but also to do this idea of understanding the gaps, understanding the issues, and doing this collaboratively, and not assuming that open education, for example, is immediately a solution, and every aspect of open education or open educational resources are going to be a solution. As we do what's called the Open Policy Game, which was developed as part of our Open Education Initiative here. In Brazil is a country that's maybe not well known for educational policy, but in the field of open educational policy, we've done some quite big strides in this area, and we've come kind of well known for developing at least policy in this area. And one of the things that we do that has worked really well among many things we tried is this open education policy game. And I'd like to show you, because this is something we use with our students, but we used with federal governments, we use the state governments, with institutions, and it's always a really valuable experience to implement this as part of an activity in developing policy. So the game goes, it's not terribly complex. It has a little bit more steps, but I'll just go through them in very simple terms here. The game starts out with cards where people have to look at, to identify challenges and gaps. And so I just have these 3 examples here in 3 different colors, because the game focuses on both technical, pedagogical, and legal issues. And so each color represents each of those. And within those, they challenge you to identify elements which we think, based on our perspectives on open education, are particularly important. So, for example, we ask a group of people, normally a group of about 4 to 6 people, involving, hopefully from an organization or a government. You would have people that are involved in technical infrastructures, working with the more technical aspects. You have at least some representative from a legal team, and you have teachers and faculty and students involved from more pedagogical side. And you have these people together in a room to discuss how to devise a policy. And this whole group, not just directing the question to one of them, we would have to ask this challenge and say, do we encourage the collective and collaborative curatorship of open educational resources, for example? And everybody has to debate. But before they debate, they have to answer the question of what is curatorship? Do they know what that means? And they have to debate that first and say, well, what do you think curating means to you? And they'll have a debate about the term first before they even decide whether this is something that they have or not. In order to do that, we have these these little explanation cards, so they can, it's numbered 1, 2, 3. I'm just putting the first 2 here. And they have to decide which of the 3 definition cards are correct. So is curatorship the zeal and care, organization, and selection, or is it decision-making power over something, or a third answer? And then they'll look at whether they agree or they don't agree. Whenever we find disagreement, it's an opportunity, it's a chance for people to learn something in the process. So it becomes a game where you learn, but it's also a chance for them to understand what does it mean to them and whether this is something that's important or not. So once they understand what it means, they can decide whether this is something that they do that is already in place, that they think is satisfactory to them, or if it's something that still needs to be resolved somehow. The same, for example, would be to a card that says we have a digital repository for educational resources, or our contracts include provisions for open licensing, all sorts of issues. Right now, there are 15 issues that we cover in this game where we think are kind of key issues to develop an open education policy. So the process is they play, they learn, they get shared understanding of things, and then they can identify what are their priorities. And so to do that, we have an actual board, and this is an actual game you can print. We have all these things I'll share with you in just a second. You can actually print. It's openly licensed, and you actually play with these cards. And then when you're done, what you'll have on this game is you have a board that shows on the top the things that you think you do well, and there's probably less priority, even though you might find room for improvement. And then on the bottom, you'll have the things that you really don't do at all, or do very poorly, but you agree that you do very poorly, or you agree that the organization doesn't do as well as it should. And those become areas of focus. A final step will prioritize those. I mean, we'll have the group discuss and find out what are exactly the top priorities, the top gaps, if you will. And those will be the areas for action. But the good thing about this process is you have a wide-ranging view of technical, pedagogical, and legal issues. You discuss through them, you learn about all these things, you decide what's important for you or not, and then you come up with initial steps of priorities that you can then align with the vision that you decided for your open education policy through the steps that Dominic mentioned, and you can move forward with more concrete things that you think you want to do, that you think you should do, and that you can do together as a group. So it becomes incredibly actionable. It could be small, but it's very actionable and not just laudable goals that will never go anywhere, right? Within the course, we do this in a kind of an interesting way. I'll try to share this with you here. So we do this through a lot of times with public engagement. So because we're talking about policy, because we're talking about strategies in a wide sense and participatory sense, we want students to be able to engage with the outer world. And so we do that in Mastodon. Before Twitter wasn't popular, we were already trying to show them, of course, that free and open source software is essential to the open education movement, but also that public engagement and being leaders in the field demands that they engage outside. This opens them to the possibility of getting other people involved in the discussion. And so a lot of what we do is engage with the public in Mastodon. And so you can see these interactions just as an example here. I'll put this in the chat. This is from one of our courses. You can see we look over time as students are interacting on Mastodon and having discussions, and we provide them with the data of this analytical data, very kind of simple but analytical data, where we try to discuss with them every week how they're interacting with each other, what are the associations that are happening, and then we discuss with the students about this open interaction with the wider world. And sometimes people join the discussions, and we interact with people outside of the classroom as well. This is, of course, an open source project, and so you can download it there if you're interested. And this is, I think, a really interesting way for them to think about how do they present their discussions internally to us as in a class, in a safe space, but also how do they go out and present this to the world and contribute this discussion to the world in a public space. And the difference between those two things, I think, are very key in their roles as leaders as well. Once we're done with this discussion in the first semester, where we do this draft policies for students, and we'll share you with some of these. Some of these are published here in this link. We have the possibility of engaging in workshops with experts. And so during the second year of the course, we organize these expert workshops where the students themselves have to organize this workshop with leaders in the field that have been working on open policies from multilateral organizations like the Commonwealth of Learning or UNESCO, but also people that are institutions that have developed successful policies, or policies for very specific areas like open educational practices or specifically open educational resources. And they take roles as hosts, as stewards, and as moderators, and they get together to organize this workshop very professionally with these experts to get their understanding of, well, this was my design last year. This is what I think a policy should be like. Now let me hear from people that have been doing this for quite some time, and get a sense of how policies are enacted and what are the challenges that emerge. And it helps give them a really real world flavor to what the ideas that they had in the past in developing their own policies. They get that confronted by very real expert opinions. And we try to tailor these workshops around people that are based on the interests of those students that are involved. So of course, this year we had somebody that was involved in AI and education, talking about policy design for that field, because that was a particular interest for the students, and it's a particular interest, of course, in the field of open education as well. So I've shared a link with some of the policies that were published. This is kind of a recent, the students are just now, finishing their courses. Two of them, which I think are available on our Zenodo portal over there, is one of them was for our energy project, which is a European project that wanted to have a specific policy for OER, and that was developed through this course. Another one is a program called Open Education for a Better World, which has dozens of participants from around the world, an online repository of OER projects, and it lacked a specific policy, and that was designed as well. And the ones on the right were just finalized a little while ago from our students. And you can see that there are very specific actionable policies. So one of them, the open policy for children with special needs in Serbia, it's an actual project that's happening already and it's been funded. So it's ongoing and it will have an immediate impact. Some people are studying policies for their institutions, and they're at a position at their institutions where they can actually enact something, which is quite exciting. And so we'll have, and some, like Colorado, is a policy that's already in development, but could be improved. And so this framework provides some insight into doing that as well. And these will be published hopefully in the next few months as well. So we have only about 5 minutes left, I think. So I wanted to thank you for your questions. I think Dominic has been answering them. This is our contact online if you wish to find us. And if you have any comments or questions or ideas or links, we'd be happy to have these 5 minutes for discussion. I think Dominic is in the chat, but his video is off, so I'll be here. And oh, there he is.
I think I can speak again, maybe.
You can.
Okay, wonderful. No, I just wanted to thank the people for the two questions, Florian and the anonymous person. I think they're also both very interesting questions that we've tried to show that we're trying to help these people really develop policies and strategies that can be implemented, and we have the right people to do that. So we have an extremely diverse group of people, and we try all the time to help them develop something that they can be involved in its implementation. And this is partly working here. The interesting thing about that is it also creates fantastic discussions when we have our expert workshops, because they can bring in this various contexts that everyone has, including which countries they're in, including questions of connectivity, of how AI can be used in different areas. So we've got extremely diverse discussions, and we're really trying to build that into the way we do the program. Yeah. If there are any other additional questions or comments, we're very open for them.
If there are no questions, I'll start singing. And so you don't want that to happen. Dominic is a much better singer than I am, but his audio is compromised, so we don't want to put him in that position. Main challenge is to get students interested in. Well, I'll start, Dominic, and then you can complement. But I think because students are in a position to make certain changes, and I think that they get into the program because they are involved at their institutions or their groups already with this, presenting a framework for the design of open education policies is something that they kind of welcome in a sense. It's something that they kind of need already. So it's, in a sense, it's privileged because they don't have any I think barriers to trying to do this. I think it's something that they're interested in doing and providing a framework. And maybe it's not necessarily the best framework for everybody, but providing them with a chance to think about all of the steps, trying to have a vision, trying to develop a plan, trying to identify the gaps, making it participatory, at least gives them a sense of the complexity. And we talk about this quite a bit in the second year, the complexity of doing it, the complexity of realizing that policy is ever changing. So it's not you draft one document and you're done. It's something that has to evolve. And so they at least get a really good sense of the complexity of the process. And then invariably they take this to something very concrete. And because we ask them to, right, we ask them to do something that's based on something that they can actually make a change and make a difference. It helps because they're already kind of aware and interested in the process. So.
Yeah, and I think I just added. Oh, sorry, I've got my camera so you can't hear me. The interesting point is we often start the semester with people being rather kind of worried about talking about open education and open educational resources. But we know everyone who's taking part in the course is an expert in some aspect of education. So we try and pick them up there and we say, okay, the reason why we're interested in open education is we think it can make a difference to education. So let's talk about the educational challenges they know from their own context and then try and build a strategy around that. Sasha, thanks for that question, because what we try and do in terms of, you say, kind of next steps after a policy is published. I mean, this is a classic. Policies often also end as pieces of paper. And we have some good examples here in Africa in the area of data privacy, for example. So we really try and explain that the launching the policy is not an event, it's a process, and it has to involve feedback. So also every policy should be a living process. And this fits very well with the ideas of agile regulation and many ideas that people are thinking around digital transformation. So it works quite well, but it's a new way of thinking about these things for sure.
Thank you very much. That was actually, I think, a great closure, looking also to the future and referring to this new way of thinking. Thank you very much, Dominic, Or, and Tel, Amiel, and everyone for attending and your questions. I will soon close the session and send everyone to the lobby. You'll have a chance to interact further with each other at the thementische that you can find there. And we're looking forward to keeping in touch. Thank you all. Yes.